Hello, everybody. This is Tim Martin from Covenant Creation on YouTube. I have a special guest today that we're going to discuss a lot of wide-ranging issues. Welcome, Zach Davis, pastor of First Baptist Church of Mark Tree, Arkansas. Hi, Zach. How are you?
Thanks, Tim, for having me. It's the first time I've ever talked to anybody from the great state of Montana up there in person. Yeah. We don't meet a lot of Montana people down here.
I get that, and I don't get back east very often myself. It's been a long time, but thanks for joining me. I know we've had some private conversations over the last year and a half or two, and I appreciate your willingness to talk about issues. And I know you ask questions sometimes that I don't have answers to. Send you somewhere else. But I've been looking forward to getting together with you and discussing some of these things. And also, you're going to be speaker at our upcoming 2025 Montana conference, the Eschatology of Genesis. And that's what I want to put the word out and talk and sort of advertise so that some plans can start to form around whoever wants to come. And that was one of the big reasons why I wanted to have you on. We're going to be advertising that pretty heavily over the next few weeks and months.
Yeah, I'm excited to be coming. I haven't been out that way. I don't know that I've been west of Texas, to be honest. And I haven't been maybe west of Dallas. So that's not even too far. I take that back. I've been to Kansas once a long time ago. So I don't.
Well,
it wasn't too
Montana's far. Montana's not Kansas.
Okay. All right. Well, we don't go west. We go east.
Right.
So I think most vacationers in Arkansas are going to Florida. It seems like.
Right. Well, I think you'll enjoy it. Montana is very special. I kind of fell in love with the state about the time I got married. It took me a few years to actually get moved up here from Denver, Colorado. After I got married, I had two children. My two oldest sons were born in Colorado, and our third was on the way when we moved to Whitehall, Montana in 1999. But you'll love the state. I think it's very different. It's very appealing in the summertime. It's beautiful. It has scenery and gorgeous. They make movies like within the 30-40 mile radius of where I live. They make movies all the time. I could list off a whole bunch of movies that were made and filmed right here in Southwest Montana.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Nobody films anything in Northeast Arkansas, just so you know.
Well, you guys have rivers, don't you? Like whitewater rafting and stuff like that?
Yeah, I mean some, but it's more for fishing instead of that type of stuff.
Well, fishing is a big deal here too, but there's whitewater rafting that's top shelf.
Yeah, there's not a ton of that here.
Okay. So. All right. So the plan is for this conference, we have a week reservation. Well, it's Tuesday through Friday, July 22nd through 25th here in Whitehall, Montana. I've already set it up with a very large historic barn that is converted into a wedding center. And so we're going to have our conference at the Copper K Barn, July 22nd through 25th. And the plan is to have evening conference sessions, but then have the days free for fellowship time, for touring of the area, for doing all kinds of things that Montana offers, enjoying the outdoors. So that's kind of what we were thinking is develop almost a vacation destination conference. So there's going to be, good teaching and conference presentations in the evenings. We're going to have a big meal every evening, get started and go onto our schedule. But the days are going to be free to, check out the mountains, check out the rivers. There's towns like Bozeman, Montana that have a lot to offer as far as museums and other things to do in the area. This is a very big tourist area for fishing and for outdoor stuff. So that was the idea. I've been going to conferences for, probably 25 years now, and they're always like weekend events, right?
Right.
So
that's what ours was.
You fly in on Friday, get rolling, and then, you wrap up sometime on Sunday and everybody goes home and goes back to work. And it's like an overwhelming crush of teaching and things, which is great. And you have recordings that can be used forever.
Yeah, but it's still difficult. Like even at ours, I felt like it was a marathon.
Right.
So maybe David probably does a better job at Virginia than what we did here, but that Saturday was just wall to wall.
Yeah.
So
we have the same thing. Steve Magua was planning this with myself, and we had the same thing in St. Louis. By the after like 3 or 4 sessions in one day, you're pretty much can't take any more in.
Well, especially the type of teaching that is normally at these conferences.
Right.
So, I mean, it's not, it requires a lot of mental work. So,
right. And so with the Montana conference, we're going to have heavy duty teaching, but it's all going to be in the evenings. And I anticipate that people are going to go so much here. When they get here, there's so much to do that they're going to get worn out too, physically, like just from travel. Everything's spread out. You got to drive a lot in Montana, but there's a lot to see and do. And so I do anticipate by the end of this conference, we're all going to be wiped out as well, but it's going to be a different kind of wiped out. It's going to be, touring, social time with each other. And it's going to be, everything combined, because that brings the socialized side of it for the conference. That sometimes it's great in the weekend conference, but it doesn't feel like there's enough of that.
No, I agree.
So that was our thinking. And the wedding center where we're going to be having it, just to let everybody know, it's got like this multi-acre lawn out in the whole parking area and just general meeting area where they have outdoor weddings and stuff. And because we're doing it during the week and not on a weekend, we are free to camp there. We're free to pull RVs in there and park RVs there for the week during the conference, free of charge. So what I anticipate happening, Zach, is I anticipate kind of a festival atmosphere on site, because we'll have like people staying there, right? And then we can like have events, people going different places, meeting up and joining up, and if they want to go see stuff during the day, then come back, and then we'll have the evening conference. There's also hotels in the area if that doesn't appeal to people, camping and RVing and stuff. There's also cabins, fishing accommodations, hotels. There's a lot of Airbnb in the area because this is a tourist area. But it is important that people start thinking about some of those plans here in the next couple months, because Montana gets really, really full that time of year in the summertime. It's our big visitor season. Everybody wants to go to Montana in the summertime. It's heaven on earth.
Nobody's trying to come during the snow, huh?
They come for the snow for skiing and snowmobiling. So there is that season, and there's hunting up until we get into the really hard part of the winter. So there is a lot of travel, especially Big Sky. Big Sky is about an hour and a half from me. Big Sky, Montana is where all the bigwigs go and play. It's like the new version of Vail, Colorado. So there is some tourism in the wintertime, but it's limited to that, the winter sports. There's actually ice climbing in the area. People do winter ice climbing and extreme type skiing, like crazy stuff. So there is that in the wintertime, but summertime's way bigger, a lot more people, a lot more tourists. So that's what we're looking forward to. Yeah.
Well, I'm excited to see it. I'm excited to come out and know it'll be a good time. How many sessions are you going to do in the evening? You're going to do like 3?
We're looking at 3 sessions after dinner. We're going to have dinner, then a praise and worship time, probably half an hour of that. We have a praise and worship team coming, and they'll kick us off with worship every evening together, which I think will be a really good dimension to that. And then 3 sessions, and then probably a question and answer period, like 30 minutes afterwards of everybody involved. And so it's 4 days, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, 3 sessions a day. So it'll be 12 sessions altogether spread over the conference, plus the Q&As. And that breaks out really well because we have six confirmed speakers right now. So it's basically 2 presentations over the week per speaker, which isn't overloading. I thought that was really nice because then the speakers can enjoy the area too. They're not overworked. Right. And I have to say, we have Don Preston coming. You're scheduled to come. We have Rick Welch from the Burros of Bereas coming. Steve Magua is actually my partner and co-host on this. This is the Ask the Pastor conference. This will be the 3rd annual Ask the Pastor conference. And Jeff Vaughn, my co-author with Beyond Creation Science, will also be speaking, and myself. And I want to make it really clear up front, this is not formally a covenant creation conference, even though our topic for our conference is called the Eschatology of Genesis. Three of the 6 speakers, yourself including, do not identify or promote covenant creation, right? So, you guys may be studying it or whatever. Rick Welch is another one. He's not a covenant creationist. Don Preston is not a covenant creationist. But we invited just a variety of people like that who do work on the Genesis issue, because I think there's a lot of overlap. And, Don Preston's going to be speaking about the death of Adam, right? And that's really important. And even within the preterist circles, we're going to release all of the session titles here soon, probably the next couple of days, so people can see what the actual topics are going to be. But I want to stress up front that this is not a covenant creation conference formally. This is an Eschatology of Genesis conference. And the beautiful thing about having a variety of people here is it's sort of like, I don't know if you were, when I was a kid in elementary school, we always had to take like spelling tests or math tests. And whenever we got done, the teacher said, everybody trade papers, right? And then you give your paper to your neighbor and they give your paper, and they go through and they grade it. They went through and you had to mark wherever you got wrong, right? Have you had that experience as a kid?
Oh yeah.
Okay. So that's basically what I'm thinking of this conference is we got different people coming in from different perspectives of Genesis as preterists within that context, that framework of fulfillment. And we're basically like, sharing work, right? We'll take a look at this and I'll look at yours, and good feedback, iron sharpens iron, that whole concept. That's really the idea behind it.
I think for anybody in maybe the covenant eschatology side of preterism, there's definitely, whether they identify covenant creation or not, there's some overlap that's there in what we'll do on certain issues. And I don't know if I'm allowed to say what one of my talks will be on or not, but
yeah, you can go ahead. I'm waiting on Steve Magua to announce them in the next day or two.
Okay.
So go ahead.
One of mine will be on the Sabbath. And I mean, I think there are plenty of people in the idea of the preterist movement that would agree, hey, this Sabbath idea is not something that's fulfilled. Like we're in that. And I'm going to try to show some things that are in that. So that's one Genesis issue that I look at and say, well, yeah, I mean, I think that's obvious per the way the New Testament uses it.
Let me ask you a question about that though. So are you saying that the Sabbath begins in Genesis and not in Exodus?
It appears to me, based on the writer of Hebrews, when he quotes back from the Genesis account that the Sabbath that's there, and I don't remember if it's Genesis 1 or 2 that he quotes from. I think it's Genesis 2. Yeah. But he's quoting there on the Sabbath that'll be fulfilled in the book of Hebrews. And I just remember going through that saying, hey, this is something that needs a lot of study. And I started work on it, but I'm really looking forward to the next, 6 months or so, really digging into it and where it starts at, because that's a major crux, I think, for a lot of people. Does the old covenant idea start in Moses at Sinai, or does it start back in Genesis? And, issues like the Sabbath are things that are going to fall into that discussion.
Yeah, we have a lot of different views about where does the old covenant begin, right? That's the big discussion now on the protology side. Yeah. As far as the Sabbath goes, I know that people look at the old covenant as being the Sinaitic covenant, or maybe Abraham, right? Maybe they'll say Abraham with circumcision starts that old covenant. But if you read Exodus 20 and the 10 Commandments, when Moses lays out the Sabbath law, he says, because in 6 days, God created heavens, earth, and sea. Right. So it seems like Moses himself isn't presenting this as brand new to children of Israel.
Right? He's adding on. You think he's adding on to something that's there?
Honestly, I think he's calling them back to what they had forgotten and which they were not allowed to observe in bondage in Egypt. Yeah. Because bondage in Egypt and Sabbath are very connected in the narrative story. The whole idea of the Exodus to begin with, in Exodus chapter 5, was Moses going to Pharaoh and saying, let my people go hold a feast in the wilderness. That's the first start of the whole thing, right? Yeah. And Pharaoh is supposed to listen to Moses because Pharaoh, many generations back, knew Joseph. He knew Joseph's God. So there's history there. But here's the prophet of God going to Pharaoh saying, let my people go so that we may hold a feast in the wilderness. Well, aren't feasts always Sabbaths? I mean, to me, that doesn't make any sense if there is no such thing as a Sabbath until Sinai, right? They know something about their history, and they know they're not observing it because they're in bondage.
I think me being new, thinking about the Genesis, and new to the idea of thinking about the Genesis issues, like it's so much for me in the New Testament when I take these issues like that's in Hebrews and say, okay, because I'll read times and I talk to people and they're like, well, there are plenty of texts that it seems like it points you back to Moses and points you back to Abraham. But there are other texts that seem to point you back to Genesis, like the Matthew 23, the blood of Abel all the way to Zechariah. Why doesn't it go back to Moses or Abraham? Why does he go all the way back to Abel to the beginning of this thing? But there are issues like the Sabbath, issues like birth pangs, issues like thorn and thistles that I see being played out still in the time of the New Testament. So I don't think there's a different previous time that's fulfilled there. And those obviously correlate back to, I think, back to the garden scene, back to Genesis 2, back to Genesis 3 for sure, and some of that stuff. And I know some of the Genesis 3 stuff is not controversial. Is that fair to say?
I think it's less controversial.
Okay.
Obviously, there's a few different options there, but for example, you can even go further with Genesis 3 because the promise of the seed of the woman is given in Genesis 3:15 and 16, and it seems to me that is the promise that is being carried on with the seed promise to Abraham, right? Seed is being connected there in the text. So it's through Abraham's seed that we find the fulfillment of the promise of redemption in Genesis 3, the seed of the woman.
Yeah.
But you also have the other end too with the book of Revelation, because obviously with Revelation 21 and 22, you've got all the garden imagery coming back into play with the New Jerusalem.
Right.
It's like it's uniting all this different past covenant history and bringing it all together, into like this full conclusion or consummation.
Yeah. And I think even subconsciously, without maybe even when I started in preterism, without the idea of covenant creation in mind, I would still get to 21 and 22 and take that back to the beginning, back to the garden scene. I didn't take it back to the Feast of Tabernacles, in the law when they would climb up and it looks like a garden city. My mind would always go back to Adam in the way that I would think about those things.
So preterists have been so focused on the end, right? They're so focused on the eschatology. We work on prophetic fulfillment. We counter the futurists, the amillennialists, the partial preterists, the dispensationalists. That's been our focus. And I sense that about 20 years ago there was sort of a shift in that. Okay, so yeah, we work that angle. We keep putting out that material. We keep pressing on that side. But there was a shift of really, well, what is the protology of full preterism? And then we got into all kinds of debate and discussion about, because there's actually quite a few different options. If you go back into Genesis, that people have presented as the protology of fulfillment, particularly partial preterists too, because they have to have something that separates the physical world from the covenant world so that they can have a fulfilled covenant world, but still look forward to the future end of the world.
I think that's a lot of like Doug Wilson and those guys' problems.
Yes.
Like I think that's what I see. They're like, no, we can't. I can't go the full preterist route because it does something to me back in Genesis. Like, and I feel like I see that in them more than about anybody else.
Yeah, and I'm actually doing working on a book review right now on Gary DeMar and Kim Burgess's recent volume 2. I already have a volume 1 review. I'll put in the link in the description. But I'm going to work on the volume 2. It just came out in August or September. I can't remember, but it's just been the last few months. And if it just becomes really apparent when you read that the Adam issue is huge in Kim Burgess's presentation of his version of partial preterism, which is brand new. But definitely there's a lot of Genesis stuff in there, and it leads to some interesting conclusions.
What when you're thinking about things that are being fulfilled in the New Testament and taking them back to Genesis, do you think it's a hermeneutical issue, or do you think it's just like a presupposing things about Genesis issue, like this has to be this, or we lose the way we've done apologetics on the back end, or is this about the way we interpret the text still, or is this just about preconceived ideas that we have that are forced into Genesis or not? Because I firmly admit, like I have, and I told you this in private conversation, like I've not done enough work in the first 2 chapters in some of this stuff.
Right.
I see fulfillment on certain things that are not physical, that are covenantal. And for me, the hermeneutic is kind of what makes me go back to Genesis 1, 2, and 3 and say, maybe I need to reconsider thorns and thistles like I did at the Arkansas conference,
Right.
and the way the writers of Hebrews are using that. So what do you think it is? Do you think it's hermeneutical? Do you think it's, preconceived ideas?
I think there is that dimension to it. I think there's another dimension of cultural issues, in the sense that, we preterists really focus on prophecy and New Testament eschatology, right? And that's really has tremendous cultural implications in the world of dispensationalism and in the modern American scene. But the book of Genesis itself is very, very influential when it comes to certain cultural and political applications as well. So we're dealing with a controversial, and I would say Genesis is probably even more controversial than eschatology, with young earth creationist ideas and old earth creationist ideas, science, Bible fights. But for me, where I see my big transition it was looking at the ancient Near East culture and world from which Genesis springs. And I realized that, oh, wait, we're all moderns. We have scientific mindsets of ontology, of scientific views of what is real as being physical. We're materialists. Right.
But even in that statement that you just made, some people hear that and like, that's insanity. What do you mean it was written in an ancient Near East? I mean, you're automatically presupposing something before Genesis 1 when you say that.
Well, I agree. Well, I think that Genesis fits and is coherent within Mesopotamian culture before Abraham. Like, I don't think that's even controversial. But it's just as crazy to say, well, hello, my dispensationalist friend who's waiting for the rapture, that, hey, you need to understand what happened in the first century with the wars of the Jews to understand New Testament eschatology. They say, no, I just take the Bible literally.
Right.
Well, literally according to who, right? You got to go back to the Greco-Roman culture and the Jewish interaction and expectations of a Messiah in that context, if you want to have any hope of understanding New Testament eschatology. Well, it's the same issue with the ancient Near East, because that I would argue that that's
Tell me if this is a good example, because something that comes to my mind, like, okay, take the idea of priest. When I was growing up, I would have thought all the time, well, God invented the priesthood. There's, the priesthood starts inside of the covenant people. And then I get to like Exodus 17, 18, and Jethro shows up, who's a priest to Midian, and I've got a priesthood that's outside of the covenant people. And I think the way that I would have thought about that would have been, well, they saw what God was doing and they just copied it off of them. But your idea, correct me if I'm wrong, is that no, like there would have been in their culture, there would have been that idea of priesthood side by side, and maybe God's using the story to show his superiority over that. Is that fair or no?
Yeah. My view is that the priesthood of God's people begins with Adam. Adam is the first priest. Okay. So obviously there are many nations associated with Adam if you go through the genealogy, etc. It's not just Israel. In fact, I would say Abraham is chosen out from those nations as a new Adam, if you want to really get technical about it. He's called out of the darkness of Mesopotamia. He's given the light, he's given the promise, and he's going to represent God to the nations. And that's what circumcision does. So before Abraham, and I think this is really clear in the flood story, before Abraham, God's people were undifferentiated. Because Abraham is the circumcision. The sign of circumcision separates Israel from the Gentiles. But
And
before
when you
Abraham,
say that, your Genesis 10 table of nations, all in Adam, right?
yes, that's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, that's correct. At least for believers, right? Because you can have family where people apostate and they get cut out. Cain is removed from the covenant people. Ishmael removed from the covenant people, right? So it's not a birth thing, it's a covenant thing. It's a covenant association. So before Abraham, the way I see it right now is that you have all these different people groups who are believers all together recognized as the people of God. And that's why you have an apostasy before Noah's flood with the line of Seth, right? Seth's line becomes corrupt and apostate, and we have a covenant judgment that wipes them out, save Noah and his family. So it's a covenant context and a covenant story that is not defined biologically. We tend to think of everything biologically because we have kind of this dispensational idea that's like baggage. We just project that onto the Old Testament. But the more I see this covenantally, the more I think, the idea of priesthood in general is to represent God to the people around you. I think that's the story of Adam. I think that's where it begins. Adam's the first Jesus Christ. I mean, that's what the typology says.
Okay.
That's
I think that's a good layout for the way for people to understand, because I don't think people understand the way that you're thinking, the way that some of you guys are thinking about some of the beginning. I think they have in their mind what they think that you're thinking, kind of like how the futurists do the preterists, but there's some of that stuff that needs to be fleshed out and discussed more, in my opinion.
Well, the way I try to communicate it is I agree. We're playing different music. I had an interview with Michael Miano about a year ago where I gave the example from Back to the Future, right? That famous movie from the 1980s. And you have that famous dance scene at the end where Marty McFly's got to play the guitar to get his mom and dad together so he can be born, right? So he's playing the guitar and it's like the old music and everybody's dancing. Then he starts playing like newer music that they weren't used to. Everybody starts getting excited. They're all dancing all over the place, right? And then he goes into like full on Van Halen, and it's just shredding the guitar, right? You've seen the scene, right?
I've never seen the movie. Sorry.
Oh man, you need to see that movie. Well, at the end, everybody stops dancing and they're staring at him. And the principal's there. He's got his hand on his ear. I'm not going to hear that, right? And that's kind of how I feel like we are with the covenant creation stuff, is we're playing different music that nobody's used to. But here's the connection, is that the same thing was true when you first were introduced to fulfillment and preterism, because that was different music from the way you grew up.
Right.
That concept of the stoicheia, the elements of the heavens and earth language, the comings and the clouds, that's different. That's completely different understandings. And we thought that was crazy. When I was a kid, when I first got interested in preterism, I was like reading David Chilton. I'm like, where are you getting this stuff from?
Yeah.
So we all have gone through this more or less on the eschatology side. And the question is, how do we work out the consistent implications, the hermeneutic, as you say, from where clearly the prophets were working from? The prophets are going back to Genesis. The prophets are going back to, using animals about redemption. Isaiah 11, the animals are going to get together. And Hosea 2, the new covenant's going to be, with the beast of the field. And,
and that's if I'm looking at Isaiah 13 and I see sun, moon, and stars, and I get to Matthew 24, 29 to 31, and we've got this idea of the sun, moon, and stars that are fallen, and we do what you do with stoicheia, that's the same hermeneutic to me as walking thorns and thistles back to the garden. That's the same hermeneutic as walking Isaiah 66 labor pains and Galatians 4 labor pains, how Paul was desiring that.
Romans 8. It comes up in Romans 8 too.
Romans 8. That's the same hermeneutic to me as walking that stuff back as it is some of the things that are already in preterism. So somebody looking at me in the Genesis issues, I'm like, I hear the covenant creation stuff get slammed all the time, and I'm like, well, I don't understand it if it's the same hermeneutic that gets me there. But like for me, self-admittedly, I haven't worked it out. Now I see some of it. I mean, there are things that I see, but there are 500 million questions that I would have to answer. But
Sure.
I mean, I see some of the things that you see, and that's why I think for me, it's the hermeneutic that's so important. Well,
Sure.
if I'm getting to preterism based on this, then why am I abandoning the hermeneutic to go back over here? And I hate it, Tim, when people say, well, these guys just make the Bible mean whatever you want it to mean, and you got all this other stuff. I'd challenge anybody, watch any of my videos and tell me where I don't walk you text to text and show how I'm getting the idea that beast
My
in Hosea 2:16-18 are
my my,
humans.
my personal favorite is when we're called Israel only.
Yeah,
I mean, every time somebody does that, it just shows anybody that actually has read our stuff or watched our videos or has gone through the curriculum that's on the web, on the YouTube or whatever. It's not even like an easy misunderstanding. It's like a completely different claim that we make. So the more people do that, I find that it just helps out, because the more people look into it, it ruins the credibility of the critics, because they're not being honest. And they're not doing the work necessary to understand what we're saying in order to actually critique it. And I'll say this, Zach, is that from 2007, when we published Beyond Creation Science, we asked preterists to work on this issue. If the biblical protology for eschatology is not Genesis 1, explain where else it is from the text. Are we talking about
Sinai?
Well, they're going to say Sinai, but then that leaves the question about, well, what about the promises given to Abraham and circumcision? Because circumcision, as sign of the covenant, fleshly ordinance, predates Sinai. Okay, so that maybe Sinai, maybe Abraham, but then you have some that say, no, the old covenant world begins after Noah, because the Noahic destruction inaugurated a new world, a new covenant world. And I say, okay, well, that's fine. Well, then what you're saying is what was destroyed in Noah's flood was a covenant world. So you've got a covenant creation. So where did that covenant creation that was destroyed in the flood of Noah begin? Right?
And your only option is Genesis 1.
Well, at that point, there was a formal debate between Sam Frost and us after we published Beyond Creation Science in 2007, where Sam Frost made the distinction between the garden of Genesis 2 being the covenant world origin. And people can go read that debate I keep it right there on the front page of the website. So Genesis 1 is the world creation, the world stage, physical universe, material creation. Genesis 2 is the covenant world that was destroyed in the flood. So there's been that option, but there's also the option that, just think about that Noah's flood thing. Noah knew about clean and unclean animals
right
before the flood. I thought all that came at Sinai. So there's all these questions that have to be sort of worked out and placed into a paradigm. And then, once you get a paradigm working, then you can test it. You can have critiques come in and you have to basically either sink or swim based on the biblical text making statements and presenting a biblical text origin for your view. And it's either gonna stand or fall. So my question since 2007, and Sam Frost tried, by the way, go read the debate from 2008 on our website. He tried the garden as being the beginning of the old covenant, destroyed by the flood, new covenant world with Noah, new covenant world with Abraham, new covenant world with Sinai, and everything's disconnected. And we showed how that doesn't work, because it's really a dispensational view of the Old Testament. And at the conclusion of that debate, Sam Frost agreed that if what we're saying is true, if we believe full preterism is true, then our paradigm is the most logical expression of covenant eschatology. And he promptly abandoned full preterism and walked away, because he was more committed to Genesis creation issues than he was to full preterism. we have that listed in the entire discussion.
Yeah, that's why I understood that.
So that we have it documented historically. So I mean, there were a couple of other issues with Calvinism and infinite numbers and stuff that he couldn't reconcile and elect that was finite. But it was the Genesis issue that was the big one. And that debate ran for over 2 years in the preterist movement.
I know it's not on our plan, but can you give a quick answer to two of the things we just brought up? Because I'm sure people are going to be wondering, like, so if Noah knew how to divide the animals, what's your response to that? I mean, how did he know?
I believe that the priesthood, beginning with Adam, came with a covenant law.
Okay.
And I'm not going to argue that is the exact same covenant law that we see at Sinai, but I believe that the basic principles of the covenant law at Sinai exist with Adam. I think that's why you see Abel, a priest, offering sacrifices from the firstborn of his flocks.
Right.
He knew what a proper sacrifice was.
Yeah. That was whatever that was around then. Do you think that was from, in your perspective, do you think that they're borrowing that from outside priesthoods, from other people that exist?
I'm agnostic on that. I believe that the creation story in Genesis 1 is a self-revelation of God himself to create a people.
Okay, so you think there's enough there for them to know that?
I don't know how in the mechanics of it.
Okay.
I'm agnostic on that. I don't know that we'll ever be able to answer that question.
But it's there.
But it's there. And I want to go back to Abel for a second. The firstborn of the flocks is exactly what you see in Deuteronomy, that Israel is required to offer the firstborn. What does the firstborn signify? It signifies that everything of your possession is God's.
Right.
You are God's people. The tithe. Abraham tithes to Melchizedek. That Abraham's long before Moses and the tithe and the law. Yeah. But that tithe recognized that Abraham is God's people. So everything that he gives is symbolized by that 10%.
And there's another priesthood too.
All
right, answer this one too, and I'll leave you alone. Let you get back real quick. IO, you mentioned IO a while ago and how people claim covenant creation leads to IO. What would you say to refute that?
The Genesis creation account is given to us in Genesis chapter 1 in temple architecture. There's the heaven and earth in Genesis 1:1, and then there's creatures of the sea in Genesis 1:21 and 22. There's things outside of just the man, the Adam, being created in Genesis chapter 1. In fact, on day 5, God gives blessings to the fish of the sea and birds of the air, covenant blessings. Be fruitful and multiply. And people read right over that. They think the whole story is about man. No, we are introduced in day 5 that God blessed the fish of the sea and the birds of the air with a covenant blessing.
And you're saying that's people.
I'm saying that's temple architecture, and the temple always had a place for other people besides Israel. That's what we call the courts of the Gentiles. And when Solomon built the temple, Solomon knew that what he was building was not just Israel only. Because he said, if any foreigner comes here and brings a sacrifice or offers prayers to God of heaven, may he listen to his temple. And Isaiah 56 goes and says, this is a house of prayer for all nations. See, we have this idea that the temple is Israel only, and that's not true. That's what the Pharisees believed. Right. That's what Jesus' enemies believed. Get those Gentiles out of here. They can't come here unless they're circumcised.
So people are going to look at that and say, well, that's the most insane thing I've ever heard, that you're coming up with the idea that the Genesis 1 animals are humans. And you're going to say, look, read Hosea 2, 16, 18, read Acts 10, Acts 11 in Peter's dream, and you're going to see that language everywhere, or Nebuchadnezzar's dream.
Read Zephaniah 1, 2, and 3. I'm going to sweep off all creation, birds, fish, beasts of the field, man on the land. And
Ezekiel 47's
yeah,
temple.
Zephaniah 1's talking about the Babylonian captivity. And if you go back to Jeremiah 27, Nebuchadnezzar took all the nations into captivity, not just Israel. He grabbed Moab and Ammon and Edomites. He grabbed them all because they were all going into captivity. See, we read the story as if it's Israel only. It's not true.
You think that the hermeneutic is consistent to do that, to get you back to Genesis 1, just like you do that with preterism on the back end from the prophets. Is that fair or no? Like, is that your argument? Or
I see from my view, it was the most natural re-examination of Genesis from a covenant eschatology perspective. Yes.
And y'all
it
laid out
wasn't easy. It wasn't easy. I'm not saying it was easy, because we have so many ideas about Genesis creation, the material ex nihilo doctrine, right? And the image of God tradition. And that's just one of them. I mean, there's like breath of life stuff that's about human beings, right? That's about biological origins.
The image of God stuff is something I've been dealing with in several of the last months in Hebrews, connecting stuff back to Romans 8, and they were being conformed to his image. And so there's a lot of that, a lot of those issues, man, they carried back.
Here's the thing that I see very clearly is that a lot of preterists will say, okay, the church missed eschatology because the church early on was too influenced by Greco-pagan Greek thinking, right? And it has to do with expecting the end of the physical universe. Well, guess what? All of our doctrines of creation from Genesis was formulated by the very same people.
Okay.
So yeah, I think we need to think about what the full implications are of a covenant approach to Scripture, because the Bible is a covenant book from beginning to end. And I think that's that's the breakthrough that preterism makes on the eschatology side. And we just simply ask, well, if that's true at the end, why isn't that true at the beginning? And the second question is, where does it make that break? Because nobody can agree on that. And we've been asking now for almost 20 years, give us a different alternative that makes sense out of all of the biblical narrative and detail. We want to see other options. And our critics just go straight to, material reading of Genesis creation as if that's not even questioned. That's not even, you can't even discuss that option without, abandoning Christianity while they're full preterists.
Did y'all lay out in Beyond Creation Science? It's been over a year since I've read it. Did y'all lay out the issues with physical reading of Genesis 1?
We did. We introduced covenant creation in the first formal publication with Beyond Creation Science. We didn't flesh it out. We didn't develop details like what we're talking about today. That's all after the book. We introduced, hey, this needs to be examined. We need to study this out. And since 2007, I've done two things. My life basically has been two issues since the publication of Beyond Creation Science. In 2009, I bought a farm here in Montana with my family. And we've been involved in agriculture for a long time. Even back in Denver, we were doing kind of small scale, local organic farming. In fact, going back to my teenage years, I spent a summer in Indiana working on a big farm, learning, the corporate farm business. And they had pigs and they had crops and they had cows and everything. Huge, multi-thousands of acres. So after Beyond Creation Science, and people don't realize this, they think, well, what does that got to do with a book you wrote? Well, Beyond Creation Science makes the theological case that the physical world outside that we live in was not cursed materially. I bought a farm because I want to go put that theology to the test in the real world. And so we're involved with regenerative agriculture here in Montana, and I've been involved with regenerative agriculture. Actually, before we wrote the book, I was sort of tinkering with it, but I went full on with that paradigm of thinking to bring health back to the soil and bring health back to human diet and stuff. Because I mean, now people are talking about with RFK, with Trump. We've been doing this for like 10, 20 years already. That's getting mainstream now with stuff that he says. Right. So the first thing I did was I bought a farm to try out regenerative agriculture, which from my perspective is the practical application of full preterist eschatology.
For anybody listening, he's talking about the ground curse in Genesis at the early parts. And you see that as covenantal, connected to the thorns and thistles and the wicked in the seed line.
Yep.
And that's why
it doesn't have anything to do with the world, the physical world that we live in. And that's really what futurists are looking for to be resolved in their eschatology, right? Young earth creationists say, well, God cursed this whole world when Adam sinned, and we're going to get all the curse removed. It's all going to be a perfect world when Jesus comes back.
So you're going to point to Matthew 13 and say the thorns and thistles explanation, which was burned to fire, is your ground curse.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's the first thing I did was I bought a farm, which we've been talking about for a long time. And we've been very blessed here with the farm. And regenerative agriculture has been sort of an outlet for me for ministry, because we work with a lot of people in the local area who have similar, I mean, they're not necessarily Christian. I'm not saying they're Christian, but they have similar priorities for life and values, sort of looking for solutions to, big problems. And so a lot of my products from the farm go to grocery stores in the area. And so it creates an interesting relationship between me and people involved in the grocery stores, people that come to the farm and help us because they like what we're doing and they come here to learn. We've been doing it for a long time. So that was the first thing I did after I published Beyond Creation Science. The second thing that I did after I published Beyond Creation Science was I started doing covenant creation conferences and more study and more networking and talking to people. And, when somebody starts doing good work, I like to encourage them to keep going that direction. And I benefit from them. So it's been a theological odyssey after the book, because the book just introduces the idea. Yeah. Doesn't flesh anything out, but it says, hey, this is the logical end of full preterism. And so ever since then, it's been covenant creation studies. I started the YouTube channel a year ago, and that, Travis Drum was the one who told me to do that. I'm talking to Travis. He's like, man, you need to start a YouTube channel. I'm like, really? And he started telling me how he enjoyed doing material like that and getting good feedback and, sermons and stuff. And I thought about it some more, and it's like, I spent 3 days after I talked to Travis. I spent like 3 days watching videos on YouTube about how to make YouTube videos. My wife thought I was crazy.
StreamYard's the easiest.
Yeah. So, and that's where we are. I'm going to keep on. I've got a lot more material coming. If people want to see what we have for them to examine, if they want to just do a dive, spend the time studying, you can go to beyondcreationscience.com, which is our website. And that's got a huge archive of related content and material. And then you go to my YouTube channel, Covenant Creation on YouTube, where I am developing a curriculum series that goes from beginning to end with a covenant creation view. I have a lot of old conference, 2009 conference, covenant creation conference recordings are available, 2010 conference recordings are available. We did many shows with Michael Miano in 2022, and that essentially is a conference. All of those presentations are there. The work at 2023 conference with Steve Magua in St. Louis, Missouri, and this year, which are related to covenant creation, although he did not have a formal covenant creation conference. It was just one aspect of what he was doing. It's all there, and it's all there to be examined, and I just leave that for people to chew on it. And I totally understand if you say, what you guys are saying is insane. I believed it was insane too.
I think full preterism is early. Like a lot of people aren't ready for it. And if what you guys are doing with covenant creation, if it is right, is I mean, you were way early in 2007, but I mean, still early now. So, but you agree, you think there are things inside of it that still have to be fleshed out.
I think I see 3 or 4 big issues that need to be worked out that look really cloudy to me. Is like, you know,
In the covenant creation world?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think all of it, I look at it thinking about the preterism stuff, and I mean, I see the Genesis issue as something that needs further work in it. So, I mean, I agree, but there's other things I see in preterism need worked out. But
well, I would say that a lot of the debates that are going on in preterism today and the factions on the preterist side are really just different views of Genesis manifesting.
Right.
Right. So, I mean, death of Adam is like one of the obvious ones with the resurrection debate. That's
I think that's the single biggest difference inside the whole deal. If you're going to put physical death in the curse or not, and that's a major, but that sends you a lot of different ways right out of the gate.
That's the obvious one, but I think there's probably 10 more issues that are playing into debates within preterism amongst each other, like preterist universalism. Preterist universalism is a Genesis issue, and people haven't thought that through yet, but preterist universalism is a Genesis issue. And that was very big. You know, back in the mid 2000s, you had Israel only stuff. That's a Genesis issue too. You know, if Abraham is the story of salvation, you have an Israel only protology that leads really easily to Israel only salvation.
When you say universalism and taking it back to Adam, I mean, your idea is that Adam was taken from the nations, and to be since he's taken from the nations, it's not a.
Okay, so the traditional view of creation is that Adam is the first human being on planet Earth. And within futurist eschatology, we're waiting on the redemption of God's creation to come in the future, right? So you have a traditional view, which is an Augustinian, is that, you know, God is going to reconcile this universe at the end of the world. Well, when you become a preterist, that end of the world is not future, right? It's past.
Right.
And so that traditional Augustinian view of all fall in Adam all die, in Christ all made alive. Well, that's done.
Right.
That is the preterist universalist. The old term was comprehensive grace, I think, with Max King and some of his followers. But Max King never re-examined Genesis within the covenant context.
Right.
He assumed the traditional futurist view of Genesis and ended up with irrevocable, everybody is redeemed to God.
I made the Adam point in a video I did on universalism a couple of weeks ago, or however long that was. So about whether or not everyone was in Adam and the implications that's going to play. But
well, I did a video on Max King about Genesis 1. It's on this channel, right? And I laid it out. You know, and I was trying to find more info because I couldn't find anything from Max King on Genesis 1. I don't believe Max King ever really did any work on the meaning of Genesis 1. He just assumed that it's the material create the whole world, and all atoms is all people. And where did he go? At the very end of his career, straight to universalism, and his children too.
I think, I mean, there are so many discussions theologically that are taking place outside of the eschatological issues. Like, just take your James White, Leighton Flowers, Calvinism, Arminianism debates. They're a waste of time. I mean, you're not even playing in proper paradigms. So there's so many theological tangents that are being chased, and they're not addressing the right issues. So we agree on that for sure.
Yeah. Well, I look forward to having you out, Zach, and you know, with Don Preston and Jeff Vaughn and Rick Welch and Steve Magua. It's going to be a good time. So I just want to invite everybody. The tickets are already starting to be sold. We're starting to sell tickets. We are limited to how many people we can put in that wedding venue. So, and I do recommend, if people have any interest at all, to look up beyondcreationscience.com the details about that conference and start at least thinking about plans, because there's so much tourism here in the area that trying to wait till the last minute is going to be either more expensive or not really convenient as far as accommodations and stuff. Unless you're just going to bring a tent and an RV or something and just park it right there, which that's going to be great, guys. This is going to be fantastic. Imagine a festival, like almost a whole week, like weekdays. Imagine a festival where you're free to just vacation and visit and go see some of the neat stuff that we have here. And then evenings with like powerful, high level presentations and discussion and question and answer periods of time. That's what this conference will be about.
That's awesome. I'm looking forward to it. I enjoyed our conversation today. I hope folks who listen maybe think about some things.
Well, thank you. I appreciate your time, Zach, and I sure appreciate your ministry there with Mark Tree, First Baptist Church of Mark Tree. I've been following your Hebrew series and learning. You're stretching so many things. When I was involved in congregational ministry and pastoring, I never actually got to preach through the book of Hebrews. There were many other books that I was able to get through, and I generally learned a lot just by preaching. I learned more by preparing sermons than really any other way over those 18 years that I was involved in congregational ministry. And your Hebrew series, I actually have it in a playlist on the Covenant Creation YouTube channel, because I really think it's so helpful to see Hebrews in a covenant context, that I wanted to bring that to my subscribers as well.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad somebody liked it.
Let's keep on going. It's going to be a while.
Yeah, I've still got 4 chapters. So,
but thanks, Zach. We'll follow up later.
All right. Take
Blessings.
care.
All right.